Good afternoon. We're going to just take a minute here and let folks enter the Zoom room. So I am Michelle Wagner with NAMI New Hampshire, and I work on the first episode Psychosis Early Serious Mental Illness Initiative. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Holding On and Letting Go, Experiences of Parents of Adult Children with Early Psychosis. Today's presentation is being recorded, and you'll be able to find it on the education page of onwardnh.org. There's also a short evaluation we're asking folks to complete after today's presentation. You'll receive a follow-up email with links to both the survey and the recording, and that will be in the chat before you leave as well. This is a Zoom webinar, which means your camera and microphone are off. The Q&A feature is working, so please enter any questions you have there. My colleague, Heidi Canton, and I will work to get your questions answered as best we can. With us today are 4 people who can help us discuss the experiences of parents whose lives have been impacted by serious mental health challenges, primarily psychosis. So with us is Anne Williams-Wengert. I'll give you her bio in a second here. We also have Carla La Rochelle from Seacoast Mental Health Center. We have Samantha Mulvey from Greater Nashua Mental Health. And we have Pam Brazo, who is a parent who's worked in a volunteer role with many other parents and also has her own personal experience. So we welcome you all. Thank you for joining us. And we're going to start this webinar with you and your research. But first, I wanted to share with folks a little bit about you and your background. Anne Williams-Wengert has worked in community mental health for 13 years and taught psychology at St. Catherine's University for 8 years. Most recently, Anne completed her PhD in family social science at the University of Minnesota. Yay, Anne. Anne's research focuses primarily on the treatment of serious mental illness, both from the perspective of providers and families. Her dissertation was on grief in parents of adult children with early psychosis. She's currently working at the Navigate program in St. Louis Park, Minnesota. So that's an early psychosis intervention program. We'll talk a little bit about that with this group. And she's working as an individual resiliency trainer. So Anne, now I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Hello, everyone. I'm going to share my screen here. Get to see the inner workings here. Yes. I'm just delighted to be here. Thank you again, Michelle, so much for inviting me here. Just want to point out, because I'm a stickler for details, that I'm a master's level psychologist and my PhD is in family social science. So the board of the Minnesota Board of Psychology is really a stickler about that. So I just want to be really clear about that. And yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. First, I just want to say that there's a few reasons why I did this research and why I got into this. And the first one is that this is close to home for me. So I have a family member who has a serious mental illness. Diagnosis is always a little murky, but it's probably bipolar 1. And it's been a very difficult path for everyone in our family, especially I've watched my mom try to navigate her role as a mother of an adult with someone who has a very fluctuating capacity with their mental health. And so that definitely influenced my work. I also worked in the community, as Michelle mentioned, for about 13 years. And in working with people that had serious mental illness, and then I did crisis work. And I would often end up getting calls from families, right, who were concerned about, oftentimes it was parents calling about their children. That first episode of psychosis, I really saw that in my work in the crisis team. And I ended up working a lot with families, even though my role was to work with individuals, right? But I oftentimes ended up working with parents. So that definitely influenced my work. And then I went back to school about 4 years ago, and I learned about this theory of ambiguous loss. And something clicked for me when I heard about it. It clicked with my experience as a family member, and then it clicked in regards to my work in the community of thinking about the grief that I saw in families that were trying to navigate, how do I respond to this loved one who I knew in one way at one point and now is experiencing something that has completely changed who they are. oftentimes, not always, but often. So the theory of ambiguous loss, you may or may not be familiar with that, but it comes from Dr. Pauline Boss. There's a picture of her, and she's a professor emerita at the University of Minnesota. And it's a theory that is meant to address a loss when there's a mix of absence and presence, right? So it could be applied to a lot of different situations. In the situation we're talking about, what we often have is we have a person in our life, a family member who's physically present, usually, right? That we know them, they're still alive, but their absence is not their psychological presence is not the same. So in a way, they're almost emotionally or psychologically absent or changed. And so there's this kind of mix. It's like, well, we haven't really lost them, but yet they're not the same that they were before. And so that is how it made sense to me. The loss in ambiguous loss is often meant to be characterized, or it's often characterized by uncertainty. So just not knowing what is lost, what isn't lost. And then oftentimes in ambiguous loss, there's no clear end. It's not like, and now we've treated it and now it's over, or now they're going to come back and it's over. But there's not, we don't really know when or if it's going to end. And we definitely see that in early psychosis and in serious mental illness. Another important concept that I would just want to point out is this idea of boundary ambiguity. And this was one of the concepts that Dr. Boss first talked about when provided her theory of ambiguous loss. And she said that when people are experiencing this ambiguous loss, oftentimes family members are trying to understand, are they in the family or are they out of the family? Do they have the same role that they had before or do they not? And so they're trying to straddle and figure out what their role is with this family member that's a mix of absence and presence, and then also what the family member's role is in the family. And it's confusing, and there's not a lot of answers. And so boundary ambiguity is a concept that's been used in other experiences, like family members with dementia, for example. And so there's a measure for it. And so I use that in my dissertation. I just wanted to point that out. So why, ambiguous loss theory? Well, psychosis, it typically occurs in this launching stage of early adulthood, late adolescence, right? And that period of time is already uncertain and stressful. You had this person who was this kid, and they always needed your care, and now they're starting to kind of like drive, and they're starting to emerge as this adult, and then they have all these rights, and yet you're still feeling responsible, and you still maybe don't see them in that way, right? So the launching stage is murky and uncertain anyway. But psychosis brings about this unexpected change in their capacity, or in the loved one's capacity, to make decisions and to be independent. And it requires the family to adapt in a way that they didn't anticipate. So while we could have anticipated adulthood, most families don't anticipate psychosis. They don't anticipate that that's going to happen, and they're going to have to navigate something that is even more complex. And I should point out, I think I missed something back, and just why ambiguous loss theory is that it's a family theory. So it recognizes the relational experiences. And oftentimes when we talk about psychosis or mental health, we think about it from the individual perspective, not the family perspective, because that's our medical care system, right? And I kind of talk about that quite a bit in my work. So why parents? Well, parents are often the first people to notice psychosis. And that's important to recognize that role, because parents have this unique role with their children, right? They've seen them from early on. They've had this responsibility to provide caregiving, a responsibility to take care of them and to see them grow. And they have anticipated ideas about where this child's life is going to go. And so parents have a unique role, and I would argue that they have a unique experience in the psychosis. It's not the same as a sibling's experience. A sibling experience certainly is meaningful, and I'm a sibling, so I understand that. But a parent's role is different, right? There's that responsibility that isn't quite there on a more level relationship. So we also know that parents' relationships with their children are unique. So we know that having family involved, having parents involved, helps to ensure and facilitate treatment. It reduces hospitalization, it reduces psychotic symptoms. And so if we can have the family engaged, that's a really positive thing. And so we need to be thinking, well, what is the family experiencing if we're going to have them engaged, and how do we support them to have them engaged? So again, so a lot of the theories that have been in the past, and a lot of ways of supporting family, or thinking about family, I should say, not supporting, but thinking about family, have focused on the pathology of the family. So if you're familiar with Freud, or the idea of a schizophrenic mother, for example, a lot of the blame for why a child might have a mental illness or psychosis was put on the parents, oftentimes the mother, of course. And so that there's that focus on, well, what did the family do to cause this? And I don't think we hear that quite as much, but there's still that underlying assumption. And maybe not among providers, but you might find it among friends or family that hear about it. And so sometimes people can be reluctant to share because they might assume that, oh, so-and-so thinks that I did something wrong because my child is experiencing this. And so there's that focus on pathology, whereas ambiguous loss, the theory there is to focus on normalizing the experience of grief as a human experience, a human response to loving someone who's struggling and in pain. And so there's a very different way of thinking about it from an ambiguous loss perspective. So why grief? Well, research shows that grief is a common response. Not everyone experiences it. So if you're a parent in this webinar and you're thinking, hey, I don't experience grief, that's not my experience, that's great. I am not arguing that every parent experiences it, but I am saying that research shows that it's not uncommon. In fact, it's pretty common. And so that is why I studied it for my dissertation. So my question was, in thinking about grief in parents, so if we know it exists, we know we need parents involved in treatment, we know parents are struggling, well, do we have something to learn from this ambiguous loss theory? And as far as I know, there's been no research exploring that. So that is why I conducted my research. So I did 2 studies, and one quantitative study where I used surveys to explore specifically parents' relationships with their children and their experiences of their grief. And then I also did a qualitative study, which is interviewing people, where I talk to parents about their experiences of their grief. I'm going to summarize the first one pretty short because I really want to dive into the qualitative research, but I'll tell you what I found in my survey. So I had about 30 parents that completed the survey. Most of them were mothers, as maybe you won't be surprised about that. And it was 28 out of the 30 were mothers, actually. And the results of this survey showed that the stronger the parent-child relationship, the more they were able to stay connected to their child, right? That they could feel connected to them, the lower the grief that they experienced. Now, some people might have assumed the opposite, right? Well, if you are disconnected, you're not gonna have a lot of grief. Well, and it's actually, the closer we can keep them, right? So the more we can stay connected to them, the less grief we might experience. So the closer we can stay connected to them in their experience of psychosis. And that can be really challenging because we can feel like, who is this person? I don't know this person anymore, right? And so you're losing something. I also found that parents' grief was highly associated with their own uncertainty about the role they have with their child and their child's role with their family. So this idea of boundary ambiguity was really present in parents' experiences of grief. So I think that tells us something here that we need to be focusing on, right, as providers and as supporters of people. And just to point out, the boundary ambiguity measure has not been previously used with this population, so I adapted it. It was a measure that had been used with families with dementia. So I had to change a couple items. And so we definitely have more to do with that. This is all very small sample preliminary research, but I think it gives us some clues of where we need to go. So I just want to, again, that's the caution, right? To take the survey results, very small sample, mostly mothers, all Midwest families for the most part. And, just, yeah, so we just want to be cautious. In the second study, I explored grief experiences of parents of adults with early psychosis through parent interviews. So specifically, I use something called hermeneutic phenomenology, which basically just means you're exploring the experiences of someone by understanding their and by interpreting them. So hermeneutic is all about experience, or I'm sorry, interpretation, and phenomenology is all about experiences. And so just sitting down with parents and really trying to get into what is this like for you? Explain to me what this is like, and asking them to give examples. This wasn't easy for parents. It was not, always easy for me, but definitely not for parents. And I felt the weight of their experiences in these interviews. I definitely followed up with some of them about resources where they lived, and I thought it was so brave. I am so grateful to the parents that were willing to talk to me and share about this really painful experience, and sometimes maybe not having talked to a lot of other people about their experiences. I'm just exceedingly grateful to the parents that participated in this research. So again, that's hermeneutic phenomenology. I guess I was going to take this slide out, but I didn't. So again, the goal of that is to capture that essence of complex lived experiences, and certainly this grief in having a child with an adult child with early psychosis is complex. It's not clear. And again, I interviewed participants with open-ended questions and trying to really understand what they were experiencing. So I interviewed 13 parents, 12 mothers, 1 father. This was all over Zoom. It was a very homogeneous sample. All participants indicated that they had a spouse or a partner. And 10 out of the 13 had a college degree or higher. So a very educated sample of people that I interviewed. I asked them questions such as, describe what your life has been like for you since your child became ill. Describe what your relationship has been like with your child since they became ill. And I also asked them for advice. What advice would you give for other parents in a similar situation? So here are my findings. I want to note a couple things. Experiences of grief were not described as discrete events or experiences, right? They're complicated and they're messy and they're giving me these stories, and then I have to try to kind of figure out a way of understanding all that data. But I want to say that it's, again, like, I'm going to give you my findings or my themes that I found, but know that they're complicated and that people's experiences were changing all the time, and they were really interconnected. So I'm going to give you these 3 themes that I found, but note that they just really overlap with each other. And so the 3 themes I found was parents' uncertainty. So just a lot of uncertainty, and I'll talk about that a little bit. There was also a paradox of this holding on and letting go, and that's why I named the webinar for what I did, that parents had to hold this experience of, okay, where am I with my child? I'm holding, I want to support them, and then but I can't do everything, or I can't control this part of their illness, or I can't control their decision making. And then overwhelming emotions, which is not surprising at all when we're talking about something like grief. And I also found that these themes fell largely into 3 overlapping domains. There was the child, the adult child, there was the parent, and then there was the parent's relationship with the adult child. And again, like, these are interconnected, they're going to impact each other. but there was some sense of, I think there's a value in trying to like break them apart, because I think it might help us understand this experience just a little better. So that's why, one reason why we do these themes. And then I'm going to use pseudonyms for the participants. So I'm going to go through each of these themes. First, I'm going to show you kind of a breakdown of my findings in a chart. I think that's helpful. It looks something like this. So I found that uncertainty in these 3 domains, right? There was uncertainty about, where is my adult child? What happened? And then there was uncertainty about, well, how do I relate to this child? What can I expect my child to do? What's normal to expect of them? And then for parents, it's, how do I parent now? How do I do this? How am I as a parent in this uncertainty? There's also those overwhelming emotions. So there's overwhelming emotions about the child, like there's sadness about their illness, there's guilt, well, maybe I did something wrong. Then there's anger. There can also be anger, not always, but sometimes. There also is overwhelming emotions about the relationship with the child, right? So sadness, fear, guilt about that relationship. Like, what if I can't ever connect with them in the same way I did before? And then there's also the parent themselves. They have overwhelming emotions about who I am as a parent. So a lot of guilt, like I should have seen this sooner. I should have done something different. And then that paradox of holding on and letting go falls in those 3 domains as well. So there's that changed child with a changed future, and yet still they're my child, right? Holding on and letting go. And then there's that relationship. I want to be close to my child, but it's not the same as it was before. And then again, you know, as far as who I am as a parent, oops, sorry, I don't know why that went. I'm trying to move my screen so I can see something, and it's just giving me problems. That I'm not the same person and as I thought I was as a parent either, right? I'm different. I've changed somehow, but I still want to be a loving parent. So how do I do that? Okay, so let's talk about each of these themes individually. Yes, that's the word I'm thinking of. So the first theme is uncertainty. So we talked about that again. Uncertainty, where is my child? What is happening? And so I have a quote here from a parent, and this is Molly, a mother of a son with early psychosis for 4 years. So I only talked to parents that had had children experiencing psychosis for 5 years or less. That's how I defined early psychosis. So that doesn't mean that after 5 years it's over, but for the sake of my research, I was looking for that early period, because that's that time that we really want to engage family, right? So if we really want to engage family, we really need to understand that experience for family during it. So here's a quote from Molly. It was his senior year when it went really bad, and he clearly was having a psychotic episode. And it was when we finally knew it, but we didn't know what it was. But we're just like, what the hell, right? So they're like, we knew something was wrong, but we weren't sure what it was, and we were just mystified. Like, what do we do? There's that uncertainty, right? Jessica, a mother of a son experiencing psychosis for 2 years, they said, but I think the grief comes in because, again, from the perspective that we were sort of on a trajectory that he was on prior to all this happening. And we had no reason to think that he wasn't going to go on some sort of traditional path, whatever that meant to him. So I remember this mother in particular was talking about how they didn't have these really clear, like, they have to be a doctor, they have to be a lawyer, but they kind of just thought, well, they're going to be independent. Like, that was what we assumed. And that wasn't happening now. So what's happening, right? So what is going to happen? And then that uncertainty of how to parent. And I thought this mother just did a great job. A mother of a son with psychosis for 5 years said, you know, there's times where I'll explain things to my son and he'll say, Mom, I'm not a child. And I understand that. But I'm like, I never know if I'm explaining too much or too little. And so it's this really weird spot to be in. And this mother described how she had to teach him, teach him again how to open a can of orange juice And that was like, oh, okay. But then there's other things he might do, like call and make an appointment, that he seemed to be able to do. So she was really confused about like, well, what do I tell? What don't I tell? What, do I hover too much, too little? And that's really uncertain. So this paradox of holding on and letting go of both their child and their relationship with their child. Now here is where that overlapping really came in, right? It was really difficult to disentangle that. And this is a quote that I think is just really powerful. A mother talked about, it's rough because it's just so different. I feel like I had this one, so I have to relate to this new son. Oops, sorry, hold on. Who's different. And it's hard because he's prickly and it can be difficult. And I've also got to keep, I know he's sick, but there's only so much I have to say. I don't want to let him treat me in a way that I'm not comfortable with. Because sometimes when he would get sick, he would get angry and mean to her. And that was totally different than his personality before he was sick. So I don't have to let him treat me in a way that I'm not comfortable with because he's sick. But so it's harder. We used to do a lot together before he was sick, and he used to have a lot of interest in things, and it's harder to enjoy that time together. Our relationship has changed, and I missed it. So you hear that paradox of holding on and letting go to the child, right? The child that she knew, and then also that relationship with the child. And this quote just really captured how muddled that can be. Another Dorothy, a mother, of a daughter experiencing psychosis for 3 years, stated, that's the hardest part, is knowing how to walk that tightrope of how much do you help and how much do you let a 26-year-old figure it out. And I thought that was another really good quote of like that tightrope, kind of get that paradox. I thought that was a really good description. Frances said, so I do wonder a lot, like, what is my role here as a parent? Do I just sit back and let them deteriorate in front of my eyes? Or what am I supposed to do? So my role, which I've told him yesterday, because we kind of talked about this, but it didn't go great. But I said, I'm not giving up on the medication, the drug. You have to take your medication. There's no negotiation about that. I'm going to bother you about it. So for this mother, she said, nope, I'm going to hold on to the medication. That's a must, but I'll maybe let go of some other things. And that was with all the parents. There's not a prescriptive way of telling families how to respond. And I think that was a really powerful finding, was that families navigated this very differently. And I don't think any of them were like right or wrong. I think they were just all trying to figure it out with the resources that they had. And so for this parent, this is where they put a line. And I could never go about as a clinician telling a parent where that line is. And I think that is hard to hear as a family member. It's like, no, I want to be told. Tell me where. And I don't think we can. So that was another finding there. So overwhelming emotions, this is not, this is really common. If we think about grief, we think about emotions, right? There is that sadness of, oh, I'm so sad and grieved that my child doesn't have the life that they thought they were going to have, that I thought they were going to have. And then there's also this fear, a fear of safety. That was not uncommon, a fear of like, what if they leave the house without a coat on? I'm in Minnesota, so that was one thing I heard, in the winter, and they actually become in danger because they're not taking care of themselves. Or what if they get pulled over by a police officer and they say something that causes the police officer to react in a way that could be dangerous? Fear, real fear about safety. And then guilt, right, about what could I have done differently? Could I have done better? Should I be getting better treatment for my child? Should I be more engaged in my treatment? Should I be trying harder to get them to do something or get better housing for them? And then anger sometimes at their child. Can't you get your stuff together here? Can't you remember what I told you? And then anger at treatment providers, like, can you do more? Why can't you provide more? Can you tell them what to do? So just anger and frustration, and then maybe even anger or frustration at their partner or other family members that don't get it. So that anger isn't uncommon, and it's not inhuman. It's human. It's a human response. So, so for the findings here, so this is always the question and researchers ask, like, so what? So you found this, so what? Well, what I found is the nature of grief in parents, it just involves this tremendous uncertainty about their child's illness and what the future holds for both their child and the family. And that's a lot of weight for families to carry, this uncertainty. It's a lot to hold. We also know that the parents were really emotionally invested. The parents that I spoke with, and I think most parents are really, highly emotionally invested in the relationship with their child, and they really struggled with this. They weren't one way or the other. It wasn't clear for most parents of like, forget it, I'm done with my kid, or I'm 100%, I do everything for them. For the most part, it was this trying to figure it out and manage and straddle this holding on and letting go. I do think that concepts from ambiguous loss, such as boundary ambiguity, naming it that, and then naming uncertainty, they were evident in the parents' descriptions, and I think those could be really useful if we could bring those to families in ways of supporting them. So, my overall findings, and I kind of printed out some ideas here, that this is that paradoxical task, right, that we're asking families to undertake, where they're simultaneously holding on and letting go of their child. And I do think that boundary ambiguity, addressing that could, in intervention, so whether we do support groups or we do family therapy, we were just kind of brainstorming before this about what can we do to support family, to include that and to recognize that families are having to navigate that. I also think, implications, that we have to recognize that parents that are experiencing this with their child, they're in transition and they're trying to figure this out. And framing these experiences as an ambiguous loss, and trying to normalize their grief could be really useful, to name it and to say it makes sense that you're sad. It makes sense that you're having a lot of complex feelings, and to make it clear that this is a normal response. One of the things, we know from research is that trying to keep the stress low in the family can be really useful. And we need to have space for families to express these complex feelings, and space somewhere in the therapeutic process to navigate this complexity. And I don't think as of now we do, maybe there's some spaces like the NAMI family groups, right, where we may be able to do that, but we don't really have the space. And so that's one of the hopes that I would have. And I think that, giving language for family members to communicate and talk about their experiences is really, really powerful, and naming their grief. And I'm probably repeating myself now, so I'm going to be done now. I'm going to stop my sharing.
Thank you, Anne. That's a really important research, and as you shared, there isn't much out there. So you're starting the trend for researching parents.
I went way over.
Whoops.
I'm sorry, I went way over time.
No, we're good. We're good. So I'm gonna turn to our panelists and hear their thoughts on the research that was shared and the work that they're doing. So Carla, how about if I go to you first? Carla LaRochelle, if you can just tell us what you do at Seacoast. And then what are your thoughts about this? What are you seeing at Seacoast Mental Health with families?
Thank you, Michelle. So I am Carla LaRochelle. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist at Seacoast Mental Health Center, and I do work with the First Episode Psychosis team. I do provide also the family education for that program. And so as I was listening to Anne, a couple of things that really stood up for me, which the normalizing of grief, because and that's something that working with families over the years has been really a focal point, because we tend to think of grief as something that we experience after the death of a loved one. We rarely put the title of grief to other things like the potential of the loss of a future for our child, or the loss of their health, or the uncertainty that Anne was mentioning. What does that mean? I think that the process of letting go and holding on is such a natural process, right? As parents, we see it from toddlerhood, from birth, all the way through adulthood, right? You know, where do we fit? How much do we protect? How much do we let go and let them fall on their own and figure it out, like Anne was saying? And I think that mental illness of any size, but mostly something as radical as psychosis, just puts parents on that over the edge alert mode of wanting to protect their child. And many times that fear sort of pokes at control and sometimes anger. And yeah, finding where do I fit as a parent. So I think that Anne pointed that out very specifically, that I think that something that I personally like to say to parents is, it's going to take time. It's not going to be something that you figure out the first week or the first month. It's going to take time, and it's going to shift over time, because depending on the age of the person, when they develop the psychosis, they may be a teenager, and that's going to have to develop also. They're going to have to mature and work out teenagehood, because that happens regardless of psychosis. And then they will be a different person when they're in their 20s and when they're in their 30s. And so over time, the person will change, and so will have to change the boundaries, the limits, the interactions. So time is not the thing that we ever want to hear, but time is an ally when it comes to the development of boundaries, relationships, understanding limits. But grief and expressing it and being able to say, this is painful and hard and unexpected, and to feel the sadness for it. I think, as Anne was pointing out, having a space to do that is absolutely paramount.
And what we've traditionally seen in treatment of individuals with psychosis is that we're focused on the individual. And
Right.
we don't think about the families and the impact on the families, and it's significant.
Yeah, I think that one of the important components also of any program that treats this type of illness is that we may get to know the person as an individual in the moment when they become sick, but the family knows the person before they got sick. And they knew their potential, their wishes, their dreams, they you know, from birth, right? So that's, for us as practitioners, is a very important source of information to determine how to continue to support the family and their loved one through the following stages of their lives and the treatment of their illness. So I think it's so important to have the families involved, and for the families to actually try to be involved.
And we do know not all families can or should be involved, right?
That is true.
And oh, I just lost my train of thought. There was something really important too. So one of the other things I was thinking of is, this happens at a time in young people's lives when parents are saying, oh my goodness, I can catch my breath. They're finally launching. And now parents are flung right back in to really intensive care without a rule book.
Right.
Nobody taught me how to do this. I can't pick up Dr. Spock or go on Google and find out, you know, when to start feeding them, or when to, you know, let them go out on a date. I mean, this is uncharted territory for parents. And your research and research that's out there, Anne, shows that if parents aren't healthy, then the person with psychosis is going to be less healthy as well. And yet in the past, we've done nothing to support parents in walking through this process, or have done a minimal amount to support parents. It's been treatment for the individual, but not considering treatment for the parents and for the family as well. So with that, Sam, I'm gonna move over to you.
Thank you, Michelle. Carla, I think you did a wonderful job. I agree with a lot of it. I think one thing that really stuck out to me that I really love, and I'm going to move forward with bringing up to parents on my end too, is that idea of being on that tightrope, that not knowing what to do, that, you know, you're a parent, but now you're not necessarily where you thought you would be in parenthood at that time, and kind of trying to deal with that, and top of dealing with the guilt that you're feeling, but also the guilt of feeling that guilt. Because a lot of times we have parents that feel guilty for feeling guilty. And it's so important to realize that you're going through something as well. It's not just the client. And to introduce myself, I apologize. I jumped right in because this topic is really amazing. I am the FEP team lead. I do the family education, and I also do the individual resiliency training as well. So I see one-on-one and family, which I'm fortunate because I think it provides a really great opportunity. And then another thing I wanted to point out that I love doing is saying to parents, you know, you're the expert a lot of these times. You know, we're getting from the client's point of view, and sometimes we're not getting the full picture. You know, it's so important for us to collaborate, and parents are so important and such an important aspect to be a support. You know, let us be support for them, but sometimes a lot of times they're really great supports for us in getting information and really helping our knowledge. So I think this is a really wonderful topic, and I'm glad that we're putting it out there so that parents can understand that it is a lot, and we see you, and you deserve to feel the feelings, and you are heard.
And Sam, that's a great segue into what we have for treatment around early psychosis now here in New Hampshire, because historically that was not the case. Parents weren't always invited in. So this is a real shift in the paradigm. What has happened is there was research around specific treatment for early psychosis. Greater Nashua, where Sam works, was the first in the state to pilot for us a program called It's Coordinated Specialty Care is the model that they use. And that's a team approach to taking care of individuals with all these different components and different members of the team who meet with the individual, but also with the families. So family is now included and recognized as an integral piece of this. They're part of the solution. They may be part of the problem as well. And certainly if their health isn't good, they can be part of the problem. My own experience is that I have two sons that within a year of one another developed really serious mental illness. The oldest had full-blown psychosis. And my coping skills ran out at about year 3. I am divorced from their father. My mother had passed away. She was my primary support. And so I ended up hospitalized myself because the pressure of having to deal with sick kids in a system that isn't supportive of the families was too much for me. So I had a very brief hospitalization myself for my own mental health. So including families for me, this is my passion project, is making sure that we address the needs of families and include families as part of the conversation. And with that, Pam, I'm going to go to you because you've worked with so many families that you can speak to this for us. You're muted, Pam.
This is really exciting for me to see. I'm working really hard to not digress into experiences that were negative, because there were many right from the get-go. You know, it's 12 years on the journey now. I have to say at the beginning, I wish I could go back and it could be the way it is now, because it had a very negative impact on our son. To not have family included taught him something negative. But I'm thrilled to see we're heading in a different direction now. I wish that HIPAA was a little bit different so that when we have certain situations, the family could be included. And I wish that there was a little bit of thinking out of the box when it came to exactly when and how HIPAA is to be applied. Some people are afraid of HIPAA and overreact to the situations in the mental health profession. I've dealt with hundreds of families, and I mean, everything that's been spoken about are things that come up in group. And what we really try to focus on is our wellness. Like you're saying, you can't really be there for your loved one if you're not well yourself. And it's so hard as a parent to not revert to that role of saving your child and fixing the problem. And that's something that I continue to struggle with, but I must say far less now, which has made me a lot healthier to recognize that I can't I can't fix the situation. I can love and support and have hope, but I can't do anything beyond that. And I mean, I see in group the same things that therapists would see in terms of wanting someone to give them the golden answer. And what do I do? Do I kick him out? Do I let him stay at home? Do I, make him clean his room? I mean, right from those, elementary things, that we say don't sweat the small stuff to the bigger issues that we're faced with. And it's complicated, families are complicated. There's so many elements that play a role in our decisions that we make. And certainly none of us are in a position to tell anyone what they should do, but to provide, some kind of guidance. So I personally have friends say to me, how come you do this? Like, you live it. Why do you want to be involved in all these different roles where you're supporting other people? And I believe that whenever we do anything, there may be some altruistic component to it, but we all get something out of it. And for me, supporting other people, I constantly get those reminders of the things that I know, but I forget. And I think this Free Love Company, hearing other people, knowing you're not alone and being with other people that are on similar paths is really helpful. And to know that the mental health community is trying to involve families is going to have a tremendously positive, I think, outcome for the family unit, and for therapists to have a better understanding of their client. I mean, when I think about my son going in and talking to a therapist, you can't believe anything that comes out of his mouth. It's, how do you untangle all that? And certainly having the family history from the childhood to know like where the person's coming from, who they were before they were ill, is really valuable and information that I'm glad to hear is now, being addressed more positively, for sure. But the grief thing is interesting. I think the difference between when somebody in the grief thing is dauntingly never-ending.
Hey,
And while
Pam,
grief
can we,
is
can we just ask you to turn off your video? Because I think you're having short bandwidth here and you're a little garbled. So.
okay.
Yep. Now, if you can finish, that would be great.
Yeah. I was just saying that the whole grief component, and knowing that it's cyclic and it's, the emotional stages that we go through as parents is flux. It's never, you're not going to go through it categorically from A to Z and it's over. You find yourself in crisis one day and then the next day you're in advocacy mode. And it's exhausting in a lot of ways, but understanding and accepting that is just the reality of the way it's going to be, and gaining some acceptance of that can really save you a lot of angst in daily living.
Absolutely. Thank you for that perspective, Pam. I did want to expand a little bit on the coordinated specialty care that's being offered here in the state. So I think of that as like ice cream. Coordinated specialty care is the ice cream. So we know this is the model that works. Then there are different flavors of the model, so different flavors of the ice cream. So there's something called On Track New York and ISA that they use in Oregon. And here in New Hampshire and also in Minnesota, where Ann is, we're using the Navigate model. So that's the model of coordinated specialty care that we're using here in the state that involves the family component, which is what makes it different and exciting. And that is now being offered at 4 different community mental health centers in New Hampshire. So Sam down at Greater Nashua, they've been doing it for a whole lot of years now. So they've perfected it down in Nashua. They are new to the program over at Seacoast Mental Health with Carla, but they do offer the Navigate model. We're calling it the HOPE program, helping overcome psychosis early. So Nashua, over at the Seacoast, Exeter, and Portsmouth area, then CLM down in Derry, and also out at Monadnock Family Services in the Keene area. So the intention is to bring that statewide. And so we're in the process of that. We're moving forward with it. So Ann, I see you are answering questions in the chat. Anything you'd like to add to where the conversation has gotten to here?
No, I don't think so. I think, just the only thing I would say is just to the parents and families that are out there on today, just to be really kind to yourself as you're trying to navigate this. It's just a lot to undertake. So that would just be my message.
Great, thank you. I'm just thinking about, we still have about 10 more minutes. I'm just thinking about the fact that this is a great program, early psychosis. But what about those of us who've been kicking around for a while? Like Pam said, 12 years, I'm right there with her. Heidi also has a loved one that she's been dealing with for a long time. So we missed the boat, right? But there is definitely value in naming this and there being more research around this.
And I think there's power in what you did, Michelle, by sharing your experience and saying, you know what, I'm human. I reached the end of my research. I just think that was so brave. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I just think that is powerful to name that. And so as people that have been, experiencing this longer, you have wisdom to share, and it is so powerful, and it's a gift to providers to learn from you, and it's a gift to other family members who are earlier on in the path.
And that takes me back to shame. We don't talk about this topic. There's mental health stigma and certainly psychosis. That's sort of the pinnacle of what we don't talk about, right? So normalizing the conversation around psychosis. We know that 3 in 100 people are going to experience psychosis. You could get it from having COVID. Right? You could get it from taking a medication as a side effect. So there are a number of us who will never be diagnosed with a serious mental illness who may experience psychosis. So being able to normalize that conversation, I know, is a piece of this, because we know that the young people who are developing psychosis, they don't want to talk to people about it because there's stigma. They don't want to go tell their parents about it. Right? So we have to change the conversation. Pam, do you have anything to add to that?
I totally agree. The conversation needs to change for sure. And to the other comment in terms of lived experience and being able to make a difference now, although we can't go back to the way things were, and change things from the past. I think it's just a fact of life with a lot of things, that we don't always have the knowledge going into things. And I think it's really dangerous to play the woulda, coulda, shoulda.
Yeah.
Very, very detrimental to your well-being. You have to look forward and figure things out as we go along. And it says my thing is unstable.
Yes. Yeah, but we heard all of that, so that was great. And I did want to ask, whoops. I don't want to step on your toes here, Pam. And I did want to ask about, you have a support group. We have a support group here in New Hampshire for family members and friends who have a loved one with early psychosis. So it's a family support group. Heidi and I both co-facilitate that group twice a month. You're doing some other support out in your area. Can you describe that to us? We know families need support. What does that look like?
Yeah, and I think we're right now. We had done a trial, kind of a pilot project of providing a multifamily group support where we provided coaching on coping skills. We're going to hopefully revamp that based on what we learned, to add in a couple of ambiguous loss modules. Rather than just jumping to skills of how parents can take care of themselves, we kind of wanted to create space for them to be able to talk about something like grief. And so I'm hoping that we'll be able to develop something like that and try to get some funding for that. I'm definitely always looking for collaborators and people interested in getting that on board. So, yeah.
Because we know it's needed. We need to support the families. Heidi, do you want to just let us know? You talk with a lot of families. What are your thoughts?
Yes, and I was actually typing a response to a question. So, and I was going to give a plug for INR, because that's what they could do, is call the information and resource line to get some other additional supports. But I do feel that, before this subject, I was feeling my own grief, but I do feel that the best part is when we can connect them to a program, or, when I feel like I'm handing somebody over to a support group and they can get that additional support, that is always great. And I did put in the chat the link to find the first episode psychosis support group that we have. And I was going to type in the number for information, the INR number, because there was somebody asking about low cost residential options, and there's some brainstorming I can definitely do around that. And I'm one of the ones that answers the information and resource line, so I will put that number in the chat shortly.
Great, thank you very much. And I see a lot of the questions have been answered. Difficult mothering, Judith Smith wrote. Difficult mothering is certainly something many of us have experienced. Difficult parenting, very difficult.
If I may make a suggestion, Michelle, as well,
Yes,
because
please,
this is
Carla.
something that is really thought of as a possibility as parents, but I've had several experiences where the person that suffers the psychosis is not interested in any treatment, and somebody asked about agnosia, and that's typically one of the reasons why they don't want any treatment. But I've had situations where the parents actually enrolled in individual therapy, and so in community mental health centers, we typically have to address this type of illness. So a good portion of our therapists are trained and are knowledgeable about psychosis. So it's not necessarily a bad thing if, as a parent, you enroll in individual therapy and then you work with a therapist that knows about psychosis, that can coach you through all the hoops and the challenges and the grief and the loss of having someone that suffers from psychosis. So don't be shy to enroll in individual therapy.
Right, very important. I wouldn't be here without it. I desperately needed it. What does HOPE stand for? Someone has asked in the chat, in the Q&A. Helping overcome psychosis early. So that is the name of the early psychosis treatment here in New Hampshire, once again at 4 centers. And let's see, information on dual diagnosis with anosognosia, but there's so little. Dr. Javier Amador is brilliant. Yes, I would agree. I see heads nodding here in the group. How to change the conversation that individuals can live productive lives with psychosis, just need support along the way. Absolutely. That's part of the conversation that we need to shift. We need to normalize it. Yes, people live wonderful, amazing, productive lives. And Heather, pardon me, asked, did the parent study mention law enforcement integration, shame, or trouble?
Yeah, so I did type in the chat there just a little bit that, the parents I interviewed didn't mention as much about shame as they did about guilt. Now, it would not surprise me. I only interviewed 13 parents. Shame makes total sense to me that there would be some of that. And then, yes, in experience with law enforcement, absolutely the fear of calling law enforcement, but also, should I or shouldn't I? And then difficulties communicating with them, and then stereotypes that law enforcement might have had about their child. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, thank you for that. And the family to family class through NAMI New Hampshire, which is a great program. So call the INR line. You can talk with Heidi and we can get you hooked up. We have just a couple minutes left. I just want to go around the group quickly here and say, what would your takeaway be for the audience who's listening? Carla, how about if we start with you?
I guess I just want to reinforce the concept of, and said it earlier, but be kind to yourself and don't be afraid to find help for yourself. There's no stoicism that needs to go into this type of situation at all. Just find the help that you need, the support that you need, and do be kind to yourself. Don't guilt yourself into nothing, because it's not your fault.
Right, absolutely. That is key, not our fault. Sam, how about you?
Yeah, I would agree. Definitely don't be afraid to reach out for help. Another thing too, if you do have a child that's connected, although the child may not be comfortable signing a release, we can always listen. We can't confirm or deny, but we can still listen. So if there's stuff that you want to get off your chest or you just want to relay to us, feel free to call the providers. Even if there's not a release, they can't necessarily talk to you, but at least you can get some information off your chest.
Great, that's a good point. Thank you, Sam. Pam, how about you?
I would say that for me personally, the most important component in my personal recovery is peer support. Knowing that I'm not alone and connecting with others that get what I'm living. And we all know if we've experienced it, unfortunately, it's not usually a friend or a family member that's not personally experienced what we're going through. It's somebody that has lived that really understands what we're dealing with, and that can bring a lot of comfort and peace.
Thank you, Pam. Heidi?
I just want to remind everyone about self-care. This is a lot to go through as a parent, or even some of us that do it professionally also. I'm the worst one. I have to remind myself also, I actually schedule it, but definitely be kind to yourself and schedule that self-care so that when your loved ones need you, that you definitely have a better response because you've taken care of yourself.
Great. Thank you, Heidi. Last words from you, Ann?
Yeah, I would just echo and just say that if you can connect with your peers and you hear their stories and you have compassion for them, sometimes then you can have compassion for yourself and realize, you know what, I'm going through this too. I deserve this. And so I think that those go together really well. So yeah, be
Great.
kind.
Thank you all. Thank you very much, Ann, for sharing your research with us, and Sam, Carla, Pam, and Heidi for joining us. Thank you in the audience for being with us today. We do ask that you please take a moment to fill out the evaluation form. You can find the link in the chat. I think Heidi put that in there. After you fill it out, you'll automatically receive a certificate of attendance. Just a reminder, a recording of today's discussion will be posted on the education page of onwardnh.org. Find all kinds of early serious mental illness resources there. You will receive an email in the next couple of days, which includes the links for the website and the evaluation. For questions or comments, please reach out to me, mwagner@naminh.org. We look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, take care.